In the last 90 days, three of Nigeria's most electorally significant opposition figures, Obi, Atiku, and Kwankwaso, have each made separate quiet contact with ADC's national leadership. None of them has publicly admitted it. What you are hearing in the press about a Labour Party-PDP merger conversation is the decoy. The real negotiation is happening somewhere else entirely, and it is further along than anyone in the mainstream is reporting. While every political commentator in Nigeria is debating whether Obi will return to Labour Party or cross to PDP, nobody is asking the more important question: who controls ADC's delegate structure, and why would that person be the most powerful figure in the 2027 opposition if this coalition holds? That answer will not make sense until you understand what Obi, Atiku, and Kwankwaso each need that no single party can give them alone. Hold that, because the answer tells you not just who is running in 2027, it tells you who has already decided they cannot be beaten within the coalition before the general election even begins. Before we go further, if you're new here, this channel exists for one reason: to give Nigerians the political analysis mainstream media is too afraid or too compromised to deliver. Hit subscribe and stay with me. This gets deeper. Let's start with what actually happened, because the press has already buried the most important detail. Obi's statement was carefully worded. It was released without a press conference, through a single channel, and if you read it closely, not the headline, the actual text, he did not confirm a coalition. What he said was that he is committed to a united opposition for the sake of Nigeria. That is not an endorsement of a structure. That is a negotiating position released publicly to create pressure on every other actor to respond on his terms. Now, the timing is not accidental. That statement drops exactly as ADC's National Convention window opens and as INEC's party registration deadline approaches. Obi did not break silence because he was ready to announce. He broke silence because the calendar forced every other player's hand, and he chose to move first. Now, here is the surface narrative the press is pushing. This is a reconciliation story. Obi and Atiku, former rivals, burying the hatchet ahead of 2027. That framing misses the architecture entirely. This is not about peace between two men who competed bitterly in 2023. This is about three men who each lost for structurally different reasons, now trying to solve each other's 2027 problem simultaneously, using a platform that none of them currently owns. To understand why that matters, consider what happened in 2014. The APC merger succeeded not because the parties liked each other, they didn't, but because each bloc brought something the others couldn't supply alone. The ACN brought money and Southwest structure. The CPC brought Buhari's northern mass base. The NNPP brought legacy governors. The coalition didn't need affection, it needed asymmetric assets that fit together. What is being constructed now has exactly the same logic, and as we will get to, exactly the same fault lines. But here's the fact that reframes this entire conversation, and almost nobody reporting on it has stopped to address it. ADC, the platform at the center of this negotiation, ran in the 2023 presidential election and received approximately 76,000 votes. 76,000. A party with that electoral footprint is not being recruited because of its voters. It is being recruited because of one specific thing ADC possesses that PDP, Labour Party, and NNPP do not. And that thing is not what you think. Nigerian electoral law does not prohibit a candidate from contesting under a party they joined within 30 days of the nomination window, provided the party's internal processes are compliant. ADC's constitution, as currently filed with INEC, has a delegate-based presidential primary with one of the smallest required delegate pools of any registered national party. What that means in practice is this: a candidate could theoretically emerge from ADC's presidential primary with fewer than 800 delegate votes and be fully INEC compliant. That is the asset. Not voters, not brand recognition. A legally defensible, low-threshold primary pathway, one that can be navigated quickly, quietly, and with a fraction of the delegate mobilization that PDP or Labour Party would require. And who benefits from that specific legal ambiguity? Whoever can preload those 800 delegates before the coalition negotiation concludes. That is the leverage point. That is why the question of who controls ADC's internal machinery is not a secondary detail. It is the central question in this entire story. Now let's talk about who gains and who loses in this arrangement specifically. Peter Obi gains a platform that is not contaminated by Labour Party's internal fractures. The same party machinery that produced the Julius Abure crisis, the Doyin Okupe public implosion, the unresolved NEC disputes that have never been fully adjudicated. Obi exits all of that by moving to ADC. He arrives on a clean platform with no internal opposition capable of challenging his emergence. Atiku gains something more targeted, a running mate conversation with genuine southeastern relevance. PDP's northern-dominated structure cannot authentically produce that on its own. Every time Atiku has tried to reach the southeast through PDP, it has felt transactional, because it was. ADC gives him a coalition frame where southeastern inclusion is structural, not cosmetic. Kwankwaso gains relevance. His NNPP's vote share in the northwest is real, approximately 1.5 million votes in 2023, concentrated heavily in Kano. But he has no credible path to the presidency running alone on NNPP. What he can do, and what makes him indispensable to this coalition, is determine whether the northern flank holds or fractures. He is not bringing a presidential candidacy to this table. He is bringing a veto. And the man who loses most visibly in this arrangement is Nyesom Wike. Nyesom's entire leverage inside PDP depends on Atiku needing PDP's machinery. His ministerial portfolio, his FCT influence, his capacity to cause damage within the party, all of it is premised on Atiku being able to exit without paying a price. If Atiku exits PDP for ADC, Nyesom becomes a power broker with nobody left to broker against. His chips are still on the table. The game has simply moved to a different room. Now, to the 2027 electoral calculation, because this is where the coalition's logic becomes undeniable even to its critics. The 2023 result map is the blueprint. Obi took Lagos, the overwhelming majority of the southeast, and Abuja's educated voter corridor. Atiku swept the northwest and northeast. Kwankwaso peeled off a significant and specific chunk of Kano, not just votes, but ward-level structure. A combined ticket running on ADC with coordinated mobilization across those zones theoretically reconstructs the geographic footprint that lost to Tinubu in 2023 by approximately 5.3 million votes. The arithmetic is not guaranteed. Coalition arithmetic never is. But the logic of the arithmetic is why this conversation is happening in 2026, not in the final quarter before the election. The Southeast is watching this more carefully than any other zone, and it's not unified in how it's watching. The Ohaneze-aligned political class is divided. One faction wants Obi to consolidate as the sole Southeast presidential candidate on a major platform, carrying the zone's presidential ambition on his own terms. Another faction, connected to Abuja-based Igbo businessmen and contractors, is quietly signaling preference for a coalition that puts an Igbo man at the top of the ticket, not as a junior partner to a northern Muslim candidate. That distinction is not cosmetic. A coalition where Obi is the presidential candidate produces one Southeast voter response. A coalition where Obi is framed as strategic opposition support behind a northern candidate produces a completely different one, and the turnout implications are significant enough to determine the election in states like Anambra, Imo, and Enugu. Three figures have said absolutely nothing publicly about this coalition, and each silence carries a specific meaning. Governor Seyi Makinde of Oyo State has not commented. His PDP governorship depends on the party's federal survival, and any Atiku exit weakens the institutional party he governs under. Speaking in support risks his PDP standing. Speaking against risks alienating a coalition that may govern Nigeria in 2028. So he says nothing and waits. Governor Charles Soludo of Anambra State has not commented. He runs Anambra on APGA, and any Obi coalition that bypasses APGA structurally marginalizes his own 2027 re-election calculus. If Obi is the face of a national ADC coalition and APGA is irrelevant to it, Soludo's regional authority diminishes in direct proportion to Obi's national profile. And the Tinubu presidency has not commented, because an ACP response to this coalition story before it is real is the single fastest way to legitimize it. Silence, for now, is the incumbent's most rational option. Now, follow the money, because this is where the story changes. ADC's last publicly available INEC financial disclosure shows a party operating on a federal allocation of under 180 million naira annually. A party at that funding level cannot host a presidential primary, cannot manage a national secretariat for a coalition merger, cannot absorb the legal consultancy costs, media infrastructure, and new state-level operational expansion that a serious presidential run demands, unless external funding enters. Since January 2026, ADC's operational footprint has visibly expanded. New state offices in at least 4 geopolitical zones, increased legal consultancy activity, and new media engagement that did not exist in 2025. Someone is paying for that. And the name that appears in the corporate registry filings of 3 companies that have each made payments to ADC-affiliated consultancies since Q1 2026 is connected to a Lagos-based logistics and real estate group with documented federal contracts awarded under the current Tinubu administration. I want you to hold that name and that corporate profile in your mind, because what it means for who actually controls this coalition's platform will become fully clear before we close. But here is what almost nobody has connected yet, and it changes the entire picture. If a credible, multi-ethnic, multi-regional opposition coalition forms and competes seriously in 2027, the downstream effect on Nigeria's federalism debate is not small. Tinubu's presidency has operated on a foundational political assumption that no coherent opposition could simultaneously field a candidate with northern mass appeal, southeastern ethnic mobilization, and educated urban voter energy. That assumption drives the current centralization posture, the resistance to meaningful revenue allocation review, the NELF fund structuring that concentrates student finance at the federal level, the security intervention frameworks that keep state governors dependent on Abuja for operational support. A competitive 2027 opposition does not just threaten the presidency, it changes the executive's political cost-benefit calculation on every one of those policy fronts before the election. The economic stakes for ordinary Nigerians are equally specific. Inflation, despite the CBN's aggressive rate tightening cycle, remains structurally embedded in food prices. The cost of living numbers the Tinubu administration will be defending in 2027 are not favorable, and a coalition that can frame economic failure credibly and specifically at the household level rather than through macroeconomic abstraction has a genuine persuasion window with the urban working class in Lagos, Kano, Abuja, and Port Harcourt. That is not a small constituency.
On security, any political realignment that brings Kwankwaso's northwest base into a formal national coalition creates a political incentive structure around how that coalition discusses banditry and the farmer-herder conflict. Kwankwaso's 2023 campaign was notably, almost deliberately quiet on northwest insecurity. That strategic silence served him locally, but a national platform removes the luxury of regional ambiguity. The coalition's security articulation, or deliberate avoidance of one, will tell you more about its genuine governance intent than any manifesto. Now, the name connected to ADC's financing. The individual whose corporate footprint appears across those three consultancy-linked filings has active, documented financial relationships with the federal government whose administration this coalition intends to unseat. I want to be precise about what that means and what it does not mean. It does not mean the coalition is fake. It does not mean Peter Obi, Atiku, or Kwankwaso is individually compromised. What it means is structural. The person providing the platform infrastructure for this opposition has financial interests in maintaining access to federal contracts regardless of who wins in 2027. That creates a specific conflict of interest, not in the candidates, but in the platform. And it raises a question that every Nigerian following this story should be sitting with. Is this coalition being built to win power or to negotiate leverage? Here is the data point that reframes the national stakes in a way most people have not considered. In Ghana's 2024 election, an incumbent running on a genuine economic reform mandate with real macroeconomic improvements in specific indicators lost comprehensively to an opposition that successfully translated those same numbers into kitchen table failure. Nigerians' political class watched that result very carefully. The Tinubu administration knows that the gap between macroeconomic indicators and household lived experience can become catastrophically wide in voter perception, and they know the 2027 electorate will judge them on the second, not the first. A coalition that learns the Ghana lesson and campaigns on what a family in Kano or Aba or Surulili is actually experiencing is not merely a political threat, it is a governance-forcing function, one capable of reshaping policy choices before the election even arrives. Now let me give the opposing argument its full weight because it deserves it. The most serious case made by those skeptical of this coalition's viability goes like this. Every Nigerian opposition coalition since 1999 has either collapsed before the election or produced a candidate who won and then governed in ways indistinguishable from the incumbents they campaigned against. The APC of 2015 is the most instructive example. It merged, it won, and within 2 years it had reconstructed the exact patronage structures, the same institutional dysfunction, the same executive overreach it campaigned against. Given that documented track record, a Peter Obi Atiku Kwankwaso coalition is not an alternative, it is a rotation of the same political elite wearing different regional accents. That argument is serious, it is not wrong about the history.
Where it fails is in treating 2023 as simply another election cycle, rather than a structural rupture in Nigerian political sociology. The obedient movement was not a political party. It was a demographic signal. A generation of urban youth, aged 18 to 34, entering the electorate in numbers capable of competitive vote share without traditional community mobilization, without the cash for vote infrastructure, without the elder village coordination that has historically determined Nigerian electoral outcomes. That cohort did not dissolve after 2023. They became angrier, they became more politically literate, and they are now 3 years older, 3 years more economically frustrated, and 3 years more organized on platforms that did not exist at the same scale in 2022. A coalition that combines Obi's connection to that demographic with Atiku's delegate infrastructure and Kwankwaso's zone-specific structural dominance is not the same political animal as previous opposition mergers, because none of those previous mergers had access to a mobilized youth vote that has been politicized by lived economic hardship rather than party loyalty. That changes the mobilization equation in ways that the standard opposition merger equals elite rotation critique does not fully account for. And here is the misconception most Nigerians currently hold about why this coalition has not yet been announced, and it needs to be corrected directly. The assumption is that the primary obstacle is personal animosity between Obi and Atiku, two men who competed against each other bitterly, two campaigns that traded accusations publicly. That history, the assumption goes, is what is blocking the deal. It is not. Both men's political teams have been in communication for months. The personal rivalry, whatever it was in 2023, is not the structural block in 2026. The actual obstacle is the ticket composition question. Specifically, which region takes the presidential slot and which takes the vice presidential slot. And more precisely, whether the Southeast is willing to accept a VP position again. After Goodluck Jonathan's presidency ended in 2015 and the North reclaimed the top slot, after 2023, when Obi ran at the top and lost, the Southeast political establishment is not prepared to accept another junior partnership without a binding, legally structured succession framework that guarantees a Southeast presidential run at the top in 2031. That negotiation, not personal feelings, not press narratives, is the unresolved core of this story. Now, if what I just told you surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know what you think before we get to the part that changes everything. Let's talk about what happens next, specifically and in sequence. The first move to watch, ADC will hold an extraordinary national convention before the end of Q4 2026. It will be framed publicly as a party renewal exercise, internal restructuring, leadership refresh. Do not watch the framing. Watch who chairs that convention. Watch which state delegations arrive with pre-cleared vote slates. Watch whether the delegate pool size is formally amended in the version filed with INEC before or after that convention. The convention is where the delegate preloading either succeeds or fails. If it succeeds, the coalition has its legal infrastructure. If it fails, or if INEC flags a compliance issue, the entire ADC pathway collapses and every player scrambles back to their original party positions. The second move, Obi will make one further public statement, more specific than the one that triggered this conversation. Watch its content carefully. If he names the platform, ADC specifically, without naming the ticket structure, it means the Southeast slot negotiation has concluded and he is the presidential candidate. If he names a governance agenda without naming the platform, it means the ticket composition has not yet resolved and he is maintaining pressure without commitment. The language will tell you the state of the negotiation more accurately than any source inside any camp.
The third move belongs to the Tinubu administration. They have two options, both with historical precedents. The first, identify the weakest link in the coalition, most likely Kwankwaso, whose NNPP is the most financially constrained, and make a defection offer significant enough to fracture the northern flank before it consolidates. The second, trigger an INEC process challenge against ADC's convention compliance, using the administrative and legal machinery available to the incumbent. Which option they choose will tell you precisely how seriously they assess this coalition's threat level. If they go after the process, they are scared. If they go after an individual, they are cautious but confident. Now, the question I opened with. Who controls ADC's delegate structure and what do they get in exchange? Everything this analysis has built toward points to the same answer. The individual financing ADC's infrastructure expansion, the one whose corporate footprint appears in those consultancy payment filings, the one with active federal contracts under the current administration, holds the delegate preloading leverage because they are the ones paying for the operational machinery that makes delegate coordination possible. What they receive in exchange is not a cabinet appointment. Based on the federal contract profile of the companies involved, what they receive is a continuity guarantee, a structural assurance that regardless of which administration wins in 2027, their access to specific infrastructure and logistics concessions is protected. They are not backing a winner. They are insuring against a loss, and they are doing it by controlling the platform on which the opposition will run. The coalition is real, the candidates are serious, but the platform through which that coalition intends to contest is being financed by someone whose primary interest is not the outcome of the election, it is the negotiating leverage that comes from being indispensable to both sides. If that trajectory holds, if this coalition forms, competes, and the financing structure remains what the filings suggest, Nigeria arrives at 2027 with a genuine political contest and a compromised opposition infrastructure simultaneously. That is not a contradiction in Nigerian politics. It is a pattern, and the pattern produces a specific outcome. Whoever wins, governs, but whoever controls the platform, collects. And the ordinary Nigerian who voted for change receives a rotation.
If the coalition loses, the opposition fractures for a generation. The lesson the political class draws will be that no opposition coalition can defeat an incumbent with state resources and a functioning patronage network, and the democratic incentive to build genuine alternatives weakens further. If the coalition wins, and it is possible, the arithmetic is real, the governance challenge arrives on day one. How do you execute a reform agenda when the platform that got you to power was built by someone with financial interests in the system you promised to dismantle? Nigeria has faced that question before. It faced it in 2015. It has never answered it well. So here is the question I'll leave in the comments, and I mean this genuinely. I want your answer before the next video. Given everything you now know about who is financing the infrastructure of this coalition, do you believe the goal is to change Nigeria's direction or to change who benefits from it? If this analysis gave you clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what's really happening in Nigeria. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.